This summer, I traveled with the school to Europe for 2 weeks. I experienced the beauty of Germany, France, and Spain, and for the most part, I witnessed cities filled with liveliness, booming with culture and opportunity. However, I also witnessed something that the bubble of Pleasant Hills had previously left me completely shielded and protected from. While strolling through the streets of Madrid, one of the last things I expected to see was the prostitution of women victimized by human trafficking. Up and down the walkway, they lined themselves up and waited. They wore more makeup than clothing, and they stood as men, women, and children alike passed by without acknowledging them or uttering a word. If you would have asked me a number of months ago what came to mind when I heard the words human trafficking, I of course would think of pain, brokenness, and oppression. Yet, until I had seen it with my own eyes, I never would have thought to say that it was current, modern, and happening in the European Union. European human trafficking dates back to the 1400s with the Portuguese transporting slaves from Africa to Portugal. The trade grew across Europe beyond Portugal during the 1600s to eventually include countries such as Britain, Spain, Holland, France, and Sweden. The trade slowed mainly during the early 1800s as the majority of countries involved began effectively banning slave trade. However, the evolution of slavery shows a shift towards something entirely different from the labor-intensive oppression of Africans that was seen early on. In the 1900s, white slavery was a term coined to account for the forcing of white women and girls into prostitution. Slavery had emerged in a redesigned way, and the League of Nations made it a point to research and focus on this growing issue. In 1995, the United Nations met at the Fourth World Conference and addressed the issue of the trafficking of women and the actions needed to be taken to improve the situation globally. These solutions included better law enforcement against human trafficking and the creation of educational and rehabilitation programs for women. However, this evolved slave trade still exists today. It is defined by the EU as a gross and punishable crime that depicts human beings as property to be used and exploited for financial gain. The sector of human trafficking that is seen most frequently and publicly is prostitution. Women and children make up 83% of the victims, and 98% of the victims of sexual exploitation specifically were female. Spain is the second largest hub for human trafficking in the European Union, being surpassed only by Italy. The majority of victims have come from Romania and Bulgaria, which are not coincidentally two of the poorest nations in Europe. Between 2008 and 2010 alone, human trafficking in the EU increased by 18%. Yet, during this time, the number of convictions for the crime fell by 13%. There are estimated to be hundreds of thousands of victims across Europe, but due to the secretive nature of the crimes, there is no known statistic for the exact number of people affected, and the solution remains just as elusive. How do these free and democratic nations allow such crimes against human beings? Even more, how do we as human beings allow this to happen?